So this is a video about a little side project that I've been working on. It's a short story that I wrote and also coded, and it is available online. You can read it actually online in 2 languages. But this is, it started as a personal thing that was dedicated to one of my friends, and it was only available to my close friends. But then I received feedback that the story seemed to be interesting, so they suggested that I should publish it and make it public to anyone. So what is it? It is a short illustrated story about friendship, about the search for meaning, about some confusion that we have when we grow up. So in this video, I would like to first of all explain what this book is about. Then I would like to maybe share some details about the creation of this project. And finally, share some technical details of making this thing possible. How I coded it, what technologies I use, and so on. So let's take a look at the book. I'm not going to spoil anything, but maybe just wanted to give you a little glimpse of what is going on. So the story is called Domik Limited. It's a name of a fictional company that doesn't exist. And it has, I think, 6 or 5 characters that meet and they start to work on this project. But this is also some sort of a road trip story. So let's. So this is the index page that you see when you enter Domik.Ltd in your browser address bar, and yeah, let's read the story. So it's divided in 6 chapters, but only 3 chapters available when you start reading the story, and the rest of the story is locked, and you should unlock it by using some hints that you see in the story. So the idea of this story was to try to make it more interactive. So use some elements that you can interact with, like some inline elements that you can hover your mouse over it and maybe see how it works, and then some blocks that kind of give more context to what the story is about. So for example, this one is like a little TV with some video, like really actually random references that don't have anything to do with the story. And then you can also see some mini puzzles and mini games while reading the story. So for example, here you have to connect the dots in order to unlock this content on the right-hand side. So there are multiple interactive features that are involved. For example, this one uses sound. I don't know if you would be able to hear it, but when you click on it, there is this animation first of all, but you also receive a sound feedback. Yeah, you actually have to. It is possible to brute force this code, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend reading the story. It's not that difficult to find the solution in the story. I'll just maybe quickly demonstrate you some interactive elements in the next 3 chapters of the book, but just briefly. So this one also has sounds where you have to keep holding the block in order to solve the puzzle. Now, if I talk about some other features of the story, first of all, it has some custom illustrations that I made in collaboration with an illustrator. So I didn't actually draw them. I actually, Yulia, who helped me with those illustrations, she came up with the characters, but we together sort of worked on what these illustrations are going to be about. I should probably also mention that this story is available in 2 languages. I initially wrote this story in Russian, and then my friend Susanna, she helped me to translate the entire story in English, and I think she did way better job and I think the final version in English, to me, it is way better than the original one in Russian. Another thing that was important to me while I was working on this story is to make it accessible so that anyone with any device could read it, and then I had to take care of supporting mobile devices and tablets and making sure that some features work in all the modern browsers like Safari or Chromium-based browsers. And probably the biggest struggle or like the biggest effort was done when I needed to support touch events. So I have some code which is really specific to mobile devices where I had to handle touch events and to make sure that these interactions they are accessible on mobile devices. Like this one, for example, this was one of the most complicated elements in this whole story. It's fully responsive and it adapts to the width of the page. The grid increases once you reach the specific breakpoint. And yes, this was I put quite a lot of work in implementing that. Now I would like to talk a little bit about the creation process of the story and also the illustrations that we did with Yulia. And I would like to highlight her Instagram. I will put it in the description, but she is a really talented illustrator, and she helped me to develop the characters and also make these final illustrations. And I really think she nailed it. Now, when we started working together, the first step was to develop characters and to decide what they're going to look like. So the first idea was to make them more cartoonish and look like animals maybe, but we quickly decided that we should maybe make them more human. And we ended up with this version, which eventually became a main character. And then we started to think about some cryptic characters that we use in the code. And this is the creation of the second character of the book. And yeah, it was also fun to work on some special elements because the story happens in an imaginary world, which is it kind of looks like our real world, but with some fun elements, like they're driving an electric car from the amusement park. And this is how, just to illustrate how we communicated back and forth to develop this. And then sometimes I would come up with the ideas for interactive blocks, and I would present my ideas to her, and she would help me to understand how to implement it, and she would provide me with the sprites and with the images to use it in this web application. So this is another example of working on a map for the game that you could find in this story, and this is just a quick drawing to understand the layout and the position of all the characters and all the elements. And then we would think about, so this particular one contained some interactions where you had to draw like connect the dots, and we would think about what the grid would look like. Like, should it be like a linear grid, or should we maybe use some diagonals? Now, I'd like to talk a bit about the project structure and some of the things that I've learned along the way. I use React for the UI and Vite to bundle the entire project. So Vite is a application bundler that is quite fast and requires almost no configuration at all. This is the folder structure, and if we take a look at Vite config, I only have 2 plugins installed. So I use React and I use MDX, so this is quite simple. I really didn't change much when I was bootstrapping the project. There are a couple of other libraries that I use. There's quite a lot of React hooks that I needed to add interactivity, like the ones that can observe the size of an element, the ones that can track touch events on iPads and iPhones and mobile devices, or like a library for integrated React YouTube widget. Also, I use a routing library called Router, which I'm a maintainer of. And as you can see here, I'm actually using the development version here, because as I was working on this project, I was also adding some features and fixing some bugs in this library. Now, if we go to the application file, the app.tsx, we will see the main component, and this is what we have here. So I have switch, route, and like a wrapper. So just going to talk about that a little bit later on. And what I use here is just a few routes. I have the main page, I have one page for entering the secret code, and I have the page for the story. So Router is a library that provides an API similar to React Router, but at the same time, it's really simple and it's really it's as small as it could be. So it's just currently less than 1.5 kilobytes. And I have hooks for getting current location and also a set of component that kind of similar to one of the first versions of React Router. So obviously I cannot keep all the features up to date, but the basic ones like route, switch, redirect, and an optional router component that, by the way, in this library is completely optional, so you can just omit it and it will work fine. But if you need some additional configuration, you can use that. Another library that I use quite extensively here is React Spring, and this is the library that powers all the animations here. So string-based animations and also animations with a fixed duration and easing. So in order to write styles, I use Emotion, which is a CSS-in-JS library that has a similar API to styled components, although it is really framework agnostic and you can actually use it in projects that have no React. Well, when you use Emotion, you can also write, you can use nesting, you can nest components. I also use CSS variables quite a lot. So some variables that are scoped to the component, and some, if we look at the, I believe it's called global. Yeah, this one. So here I define all of the global colors, some things that you can reuse in all of the components. So because the story is available in 2 languages, I needed some way to switch between Russian and English, and I decided to do that by not storing the current language in cookies or local storage, but instead store it in the URL. So if we switch to Russian, you will see that I have that RU, and this is the prefix that is, well, it is consistent. So if you change to Russian, for example, if we're reading chapter number 3, we can switch the language and it will just change the segment and re-render everything. So in order to power that, I use a custom wrapper component called routes with locale, and let's take a look at that. Routes with, oh yeah, so I actually import it from here, I18n, and yeah, I just create a context to keep the React context to keep the currently selected language. I use a really small library to provide internationalization and to power translation. So by the way, this library is TypeScript friendly, so it actually generates types for all of the strings that you have in your project. So there is no way, so if you miss, for example, or use a string which is not present, you'll receive the TypeScript warning. But yeah, let's get back to this custom component to change the locale, and I believe it's here. So here we have quite a lot of magic, but it's actually pretty simple. So I use useLocation hook from Vite, which is just a hook that returns current browser location. So in this case, it will return the this thing. So then I try to extract the current locale as a prefix. And if it's not here, I assume that this is a default locale, which is in our case English. So now I have this, I store it in a variable, and I configure, I set current locale here. So I get the i18n object, which is just a way to get this object from Rosetta library. And this is how I can see if current locale is different from the one that I have in the URL, and I just change it. Well, now here I use a provider to provide current locale so that components can retrieve it if they need it. For example, if they need to decide, I don't know, for let's say for English, there's going to be a different image or a different, even a completely different component. I can do that by just using this hook. And then I use router. As I said, this component is really optional, but in my case, I needed that because I needed to configure the router base. And I do that so that all the children routes, they don't really need to have the locale in their URL. So if we go back to the app component, we will see that this is the root component, which is just which uses pass /. But actually, because let's say current locale is English, so this component extracts it, then removes the segment, and then tells router that, well, this is a base path. So in this example, this one will be equal to /en, and yeah, so this is essentially how it works. So my rule of thumb when writing applications and when you work with routing is to always think about that as of two-way binding between the this value here in your address bar and the logic and the components that you have in your app. So let's take a look at the example. So in this library, what I do is I wanted to persist the current chapter that you're reading in the URL. So the way it works is that when you scroll and I detect the current chapter, I can update the URL, and it works the other way around. So it means that, for example, if we change the URL by using a standard browser API, the history API, for example, if we change this to the story/chapter1, we can detect that, and then we can scroll to that chapter, and that also works here when you navigate between chapters here. Let's take a look at how this works. Yeah, so this is actually this component is basically a wrapper that handles the loading of all chapters because I use dynamic import. When you first enter the app, we don't have the code for the chapters and for all these embedded components. But here I just handle the loading of these chapters by getting the current cipher that I take from the local storage. So this is actually needed to see if you have unlocked all chapters or you only have 3 chapters by default. And then I check if this code is valid, and if it's not, I redirect back to the main page. And then I just load all of the modules and actually render the story component. And this is actually where this routing is handled. I have this custom hook called useChapterProgress, and that returns the current chapter that you read and also some imperative function to scroll to a specific page and the current read progress that I use in this component. So this this value is it's just a value between 0 and 1, and this is how I can decide like where to render this small little bumper car. Okay, so as I said, I have a use chapter progress hook, and this one basically takes an array of elements and return. So by elements, I mean like a div for chapter number 1, chapter number 2, and so on. And then I return a progress as a number, and I return an index of the current page. But this is not tied to a current route yet. Now, the second hook that I use here is called useChapterNumber from route, and this one basically looks at the current location and extracts the index of the current chapter. So in this case, it would return 1, or I believe 0. I don't actually remember, but anyway, the way it works is, again, I'm using this useRoute hook from router. I use this pattern, so /story/chapter and then the number of the chapter. So this will return the parameters. By the way, this hook returns a tuple of Boolean that indicates if there was a match, and then an object with parameters. And then I use also use location to get the second parameter, which is just a function that allows you to navigate to a dedicated route. And this one is actually different from the one that we used here, because when you use native API, so browser knows nothing about the base path, so you just have to specify the absolute path. But here, because we have router and we have configured the base pass in this component that extracts locale, we don't have to specify this segment. So that means that router will, when you do navigate, for example, slash, it will navigate to /English/. So while explaining this, I noticed that I wasn't using the proper version of router, and sometimes types were not correct. And I've just upgraded to router 2.11, and now I have a nice type for parameters object. And the way it works is that we can look at the string at the compile time, and then we can detect that we have these named parameters here. Let's also add foo ? That means that there is also another parameter, but it is optional. So, but router will detect that, and the parameters object will contain two fields. So num is a string and foo is string or undefined because it's optional. So that is pretty handy because we don't have to cast this object to specific types. There is also a function that is called setNumber, and it just receives the number of the chapter and it changes the URL. So here, if the chapter is given, if the number is given, so we just navigate to this one, and if there was no number, so we just redirect to the default route, which is /story. And the important thing about these two hooks is that they all return their result in the same format. So it always returns an array of two things. So this one is a number or undefined, and this is a function to set the current number. And if you work with hooks, you will know that this is actually a convention that React uses for a useState hook. And this is the key idea behind this declarative routing that we have here. So we use first hook to get the chapter progress, and yeah, this one, for example. So we construct an object of an array of two items. So the first one is the number of the chapter that you're currently reading, the one that we extract from the current scroll position, then the method to actually scroll to a specific chapter. Then there is another hook that looks at the URL in the browser bar, and it also returns a number and a function to change the current URL. And then I use another hook, another custom one, which is called useSyncState, that takes two of these states and synchronizes them together. So it always looks if they're not in sync, and then updates the corresponding one. Maybe it's not that beautiful, but it does its job. And I basically try to see, I try to detect the value that has changed, and then I take another state and update it appropriately. So that means that if let's say I was to change let's say if I do this hook will detect that, well, the state, the URL state is different from the state that we have, that is taken from the scroll progress. But because this one was changed earlier, this hook knows that we have to update the second state. Okay, another interesting thing is that I have my own sort of really simple code to preload important resources like images or audio. And why I need this is because sometimes I want to avoid flicker, but that doesn't relate to the story, because it's fine that the image is loaded and we have a slide shift, it's all right. Or we can use a custom component to do like lazy loading. That's fine. But here, for example, on this page, where I use a set of 8 images to, that are corresponding to, for example, on this page where I have 8 images for each of the secret symbols, I need to make sure that when you load the page and it's not cached, they are always, they're always preloaded and there is no flicker. So the way I do that is I have this file where I just describe that, well, I have all of these important images and sounds that I want them to be preloaded when the page loads. For example, here, let's take a look. And we're going to reload the page, and as you can see, I always load those SVGs. And because when you deploy, they're always cached appropriately, the browser will not make an extra request here, and you will see them immediately. While probably this is not ideal and could be improved to support some like weighted or resources that have more priority, or maybe like a queue to limit how many resources we can load at once, but here I only have like 10 and they're all small, so it's all right. So this code just works. And when I need to, this is the hook that I use here in the app, so I just call it once, and that initializes the whole thing that when the component mounts, I just preload everything. And I also handle cases when the loading was not successful, but it's fine, we can just skip it. So in this case, I just ignore the error in this case. And yeah, this is just a code that returns promises to handle image loading and audio loading. So now let's take a look at another page, which is called the Cipher page. And this is a page where you actually have to enter the secret code to unlock the next 3 chapters of the story. And probably what's interesting about that, well, mostly this is just a visual thing, so it doesn't do much. It just, you just kind of have to enter the code, and once you enter the right code, it unlocks and redirects you to the story page. And but what's interesting about that is, again, I'm using this two-way binding between the current cipher and the URL. So to do that, I use this hook called useCipher, and again, I return a pair of the current cipher and the function to change one. So again, this is similar to useState, and this is how you can use this hook. Now here we use useRoute to extract the current cipher from the URL. The cipher is a combination of 8 characters. There are 8 characters in total for each slot. And this basically allows us to use it as a number in like an octal number that we can then convert to decimal. Here I also have another method that takes the cipher and maps it to this cryptic page title. Let's actually take a look if it's here. Yeah, it's here. So if I change this, the page title also changes. Actually, these don't mean anything. They're just funny hiragana characters that I decided to use. So why not? Now, if we look at the main component here, we can see a bunch of hooks, but this is pretty much all the logic, and then the end of the rest of the file is just a bunch of styles. So this is not interesting to us, but let's take a look at the logic. I'm using the library called useSound. So I'll leave a link in the description, but it's basically a hook that allows you to play arbitrary audio and music. Yeah, but it's pretty cool, I think. So the API is that you call useSound. In my case, it's just a shortcut. Let's see, useSounds. Yeah, basically just a method that calls useSound with the URL of this file. And normally I would have the first part of the component is dedicated to like the initialization or some state. So here I just have a bunch of things like the local state for like additional things that are not persisted between reloads, and also some things like the current cipher that we take from the URL. I also have, I use a library to store the current, like the last accepted cipher in the local storage, and yeah, it's here. I use a few refs to store again, things that are not only relevant to this particular render. Like when the component mounts, it will just be cleared. I think this one is responsible for storing the array of timer references, so we can clear, like stop these timers when a user leaves this page. Here I use another hook to actually update the title. So once when this value changes, the title is updated. So it's a really simple one that uses useEffect. Then the next one is responsible, like when the component when the component actually is rendered for the first time, I randomize everything. So let's take a look. So if and it only happens when the URL doesn't contain the cipher. So if we go to this page, we can see that it's like there is a shuffle to make things more interesting. The next one is like when the value changes, we play sound. So, and we also rotate this little compass here, which is like just I don't know, not like an Easter egg. It doesn't have to do anything with the code, but it's just like a feedback. So to illustrate how this works, we can actually, let's randomize this, and let's also, let's say we want to change the current URL to 00001144, right? And we see that there was a sound effect, and the cipher is updated accordingly. Now the next one is I use debounce. So, and the reason I do that is because there's another method that checks the cipher validity, that this is the right one, but the problem is the operation is asynchronous, and it's also like it uses some cryptography, and it might be expensive in terms of computation. So just in case, I just have this debounce. So like, and also like a protection from brute force. So like if someone decides to do that, there is no chance that they accidentally hit the right code. So they actually have to wait like 300 milliseconds until the check is done. And finally, there's just this function. Yeah, I should have probably wrapped it in use callback, but yeah, maybe it's not that important. It's just a small detail. And yeah, probably maybe not. I believe that's not true. I think use callback would be, there are too many dependencies here. So I think what would be better to use here is to use useEvent, which is more like an advanced hook that always provides you with a stable reference to a method, while it always changes its implementation during each render. But we won't go into details here. So, so this is a method that basically we call when the cipher is right. What we do is we save it, we disable inputs, we play success sound. What's that? I think that's, oh yeah, this is an interesting one. So how can I demonstrate that? Okay, so what I can do is here, instead of, I can actually check that the cipher is like 0, 0. That means it's 0 in octal. I think I can just use 0, right? Doesn't matter. And I will just call accept cipher, and I'm going to, so the second parameter here is the index of the chapter that we want to navigate. So let's try that. I'm not sure that it will work, but yeah, and I actually didn't have to reload this. It just so 00000000. Yeah, that's right on. So I play sound, and then, well, there was a. It's interesting why it happens. Happens because this is actually not the valid one. Oh yeah. Okay. We'll just comment this out. Oh. Okay. Good. Oh, okay. So the last thing probably here is that I get the reference to this whole input component. Where is it? It's here. So this is the component that actually draws this, and it receives cipher and also has an own change. So basically like a regular input, except that it has this nice view here. So I provide a reference here with useRef so that I can use a reference to this component later on. And if you have noticed, there is like when the cipher is right, there's like this animation that just fills like highlights every cell one by one here sequentially. And how I do that is, yeah, this is what I do. I take the input reference current, yeah, because it's a ref, and then I call cipher accepted. But this is actually a custom method. It's not the method that React provides. And if we take a look at the cipher input component, here what we have is I use forward ref, right, to provide the, so because it's a functional component and I want to customize ref, we have to wrap it in forward ref. That allows us to, first of all, by the way, we can specify the interface that will be used for the ref return. So again, this is where I declare this type. It's the method called cipher accepted, and then it's just a function that returns promise. The promise is when this animation is done. And then I think this is the most interesting part is I use useImperativeHandle hook that allows you to define additional methods on this reference. So whenever someone obtains this reference, they can like call this API. And this is usually like used to call some imperative effects on components, things that you cannot control with just props, with changing props that you provide to component. All right, so I wish I could have covered everything, but it's not possible. But probably the most, probably the main thing that like the core of the whole project is how I store and render the content of this story, right, with those interactive elements. And this is done by MDX, which is an extension of Markdown that allows you to use code and React components. So let's take a look at that. So this is the like the source of the first story, and what you can do is you can actually use imports to import custom components or like assets. You can also export some things that can be used later on. In this case, I export this variable title that I use to basically here and here in this navigation menu. And yeah, you can use inline components like this, images, and I think that's it. And this one, for example, this is like a hidden gem. Yeah. And yeah, I just have, I have this folder called chapters, then I have a dedicated folder for each chapter, and then I have English and Russian version MDX files. So then, whenever, let's say here in the second chapter, what we have here, yeah, in this one, for example, this little game here, the way it works is, let's take a look. Yeah, it's just a component, but it's actually inlined because I needed additional state here. But some other things, yeah, let's actually get back to this hidden gem, right? Yeah, so if you want to use them, so as you see here, I didn't import this component, but I still can use it because there is an MDX provider, which is like a wrapper component for the whole story, right? And here you can provide additional, like you can provide which components should be available that you don't have to load with import, or you can even customize standard components. You can customize links, and this is what I've done. For example, if you have this link here, I always use a custom one with these funny eyes. All right, and all the mini games, all the like fun elements here are I store them in this folder that for some reason I call named attractions, and it's just a set of components that provide additional like this interactivity here that I don't use anywhere else, so only in the story. So here we have the one for credits, we have this one for connecting the dots, and actually it's customizable, so because it's used more than once in the story, there is even like some API. You can specify like the background, you can specify an image, and you can specify where each point is located, and you can also specify or you can actually specify the function that will be called to check that the code is valid. Okay, so probably the last thing I wanted to show here is how I actually check that the code is valid, and the way I actually load these chapters here. So by the way, this is actually not a secret code. This is like initialization vector for the sequence of codes. So it's a bit hard to explain, but like there is a predefined sequence of codes that I generated with a secret key, and this is like the last one. And the way I check that the cipher is valid is I take it, I then hash it with the function repeatedly until like for some number of times. In this case, I guess, well, yeah, you can specify that like 30 or 20 until you reach this like initial code. And if you see that, that means that the whole sequence is valid. So that allows me to not store the actual secret in the bundle. All right, so this is pretty much it. I think I didn't cover everything, but I really hope that that was useful. And yeah, if you want to support this project, you can do a few things. First of all, you can actually go and read the story. Sorry, I wanted to say Domik. So you can go to Domik.Ltd. You can read the story. You can try to solve these puzzles. What you can also do is you can share it with your friends. What you can also do is you can go to GitHub and maybe read the source code and start this project. You can also write me, and you can find me here, or I have this Twitter or my website with my contact details. But yeah, what you can also do, you can sponsor me on GitHub, and that would be like, I would really, really appreciate that. But I really hope that that was interesting, and I really hope that you'll enjoy the story. Thank you.